Have you ever wanted to say something is beautiful or interesting, or maybe even that it's not cold in Japanese? Well, today we're going to unlock that. We're diving into Japanese adjectives, and trust me, it's way simpler than you probably think. Let's get right into it.
Look, this is a super common sticking point for learners, right? How in the world do you say something is not interesting or a room is not clean? It just feels like it's going to be complicated. But here's the big secret. It all just boils down to two and only two types of adjectives. If you can master these two, you've pretty much mastered the basics.
So, here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to meet these two types of adjectives. Then, we'll break down the really simple rule for each one. After that, we'll put them side by side so you can really see the key difference. And then, you know it, we'll do a quick practice round to make sure it all sticks.
Okay, let's build the foundation. Seriously, forget trying to memorize a ton of complex rules. The single most important thing you need to know is that every single Japanese adjective fits neatly into one of two little boxes. The second you figure out which box it goes in, you'll know exactly what to do with it.
So let's jump right into our first category, the I adjectives. And luckily for us, they have a very helpful name, which you're going to see why in just a second. These are by far the easiest ones to spot in the wild.
And here's exactly why they're so easy. An I adjective, or ikeyoshi, ikeyoshi, is exactly what it sounds like. It's an adjective that ends with that I sound, written with the hiragana character I. So think of words like omoshiroi, which means interesting, or samui, meaning cold. You see that I right at the end? That's your big clue.
Now, here's the rule, and this is the really key part. To make a positive statement, you just tack on des at the end. But check out what happens when we want to make it negative. We do a little bit of word surgery here. We actually drop that final I and we replace it with kunai. So this is an internal change. The word itself gets modified.
And here's that rule in action. Just look at the first pair. Omoshiroi desu is interesting becomes omoshirokunai desu is not interesting. See? We just swapped that I for kunai, and it's the exact same pattern for cold. Samui desu becomes samaku nai desu. Seriously? Once you see that pattern, you just can't unsee it.
All right, let's move on to our second and final category, the not adjectives. Now these guys follow a different pattern, but don't worry, it's just as straightforward. And here's a great little tip. If an adjective doesn't end in I, you can be almost certain it's a not adjective.
So a na adjective, or nakeyoshi, is basically everything else. They get their name from the na particle that's used to connect them to nouns, like in kirei na heya, for a clean room. But for what we're doing today, we're really just focused on how they act at the end of a sentence, and that's where you see a totally different approach.
And here it is, the huge difference. Unlike I adjectives, the na adjective itself doesn't change one bit. To make it positive, you add des. To make it negative, you leave the adjective totally alone and just swap des for dewarimasen. The change is external. It happens completely outside the word.
Let's look at this with some examples. So take genki, meaning healthy. Notice how the word genki itself stays exactly the same in both sentences. All we're doing is swapping the ending. Same thing happens with kirei, for clean. It goes from kirei desu to kirei de wa arimasen. The adjective is untouched, only the grammar around it changes. All right, it is time for the big aha moment. Let's put these two rules right next to each other. This is where that core difference becomes completely, totally impossible to miss.
And there it is. This is the single most important thing to take away. I adjectives change internally. You're actually modifying the word itself. Na adjectives change externally. You leave the word alone and just modify the ending. Internal versus external. If you can just remember that one simple idea, you have absolutely cracked the code for Japanese adjectives.
Okay, enough theory. Let's actually test this out. I'm going to give you a sentence to translate. You can say the answer out loud, or hey, just think it through in your head. Ready for the first challenge?
All right, here we go. The word for interesting is omoshiroi. So how would you say this book is interesting? Go on, take a second to think about it. Did you get it? The answer is この本は面白いです. See, omoshiroi ends with I, so we know it's an I adjective. That means we just have to add this. Simple as that. Great job. Excellent. Let's try a negative one now. The word for healthy is genki. So how would you say she is not healthy? Now first, ask yourself, is this an I adjective or a na adjective?
And the correct answer is あの人は元気ではありません. Perfect. The word genki doesn't end in e, so it has to be a nara adjective. And that means we leave genki completely alone and just swap out the ending. You've totally got this.
So let's just boil this all down to a super simple 3-step process. Step 1 is to identify. Just look at the word. Does it end in e? Step 2, if it is an I adjective, you change that e to kunai for the negative. And step 3, if it's a na adjective, you just change des to dewa arimasen. And that's it. That's the entire flowchart. And honestly, that's really all there is to it. You now have the 2 fundamental rules for using Japanese adjectives. Just think of them as new tools in your language toolkit, ready to go to help you describe the world with way more color and precision. So go on out there and start describing stuff. What will you talk about first? Thanks so much for joining me today.